In the next section, we want to talk about, okay, great. So we've identified kind of like the benefit of drinking, which is that it changes one's state from a less ideal to a more ideal state. But unless you don't drink at all, or you maybe have 1 or 2 drinks a year, which effectively means you don't drink, most people are grossly underestimating the impact alcohol is having on their health journey. Because while it's great at affecting and changing one's state in a very quick period of time, it comes at a ridiculously underappreciated cost. And that's what this section is going to be about, is like, what is the cost? There are actually 0 health benefits outside of the perceived change of state from less to perceived more ideal. That's even debatable. And really any attempt to explain to a human that a behavior like alcohol consumption actually has some redeeming value, even if there's incremental improvement in health that studies can show, that's like, you just can't tell a human that alcohol is healthy and expect them to actually apply that, because we are a very, very intelligent species, but we also follow the path of least resistance. And we tend to lump either all good or all bad. And so unless you tell me it's all bad, it must be good. And if you tell me it's even a little bit good, I'm going to go all in on that.
And so you may be referencing like the misnomer that, well, red wine has antioxidant benefits, or
I mean,
it'll
I guess
help you live longer.
To me, and maybe I'm not qualified to talk about this, but this is just my point of view. It's similar to saying, if I had $1.25 and you gave me 5 cents, I would now have $1.30. That's more money. And more money is better than less money in general. But $1.30 versus $1.25 feels like the same number. And if you're telling me that extra 5 cents comes at a tremendous cost, is it really a benefit at all? Can you really actually ethically say it has benefit? And so for me, the benefit of alcohol is a change of one's state, emotional state. But it comes at a high cost. And this is really about what those costs are. And to me, there are 3 major areas that it affects. One is our nutrition, one is the liver, one is the brain. I have spent countless amounts of hours creating content around my thesis around nutrition. What I will say about alcohol is that alcohol bears with it potential energy known as calories, just like all other nutritional sources, protein, fats, and carbs, also have potential energy in the form of calories. But the body is uniquely formed to convert those calories from protein, fats, and carbs into actual usable forms of energy. We're omnivores, which means we can eat anything. In the right environment, we can get what we need out of whatever we put in our mouth. But then alcohol comes along and we have this empty calorie phenomena, which means in English, we don't have a pathway to take these calories that come attached to alcohol and actually convert them to usable energy. And all things that don't have a pathway to be metabolized get kicked off as a toxin and diverted. And this is where it gets interesting. Although empty calories certainly create some challenge with our health journey, specifically around weight, metabolic disease, what I think people need to hear is what you're about to talk about, which is when those calories get diverted off, they go kicked off to the liver to be processed as a toxin. Talk to us about what happens at the liver.
Well, at the level of the liver, and we see this a lot, and I always go back to relatable stories in our podcast with our members, right? Because
are we going back to Cabo?
No. Oh. Maybe. That, when I meet with a member, or I'm sure when you meet with a member and they're doing everything right, supposedly, I'm tracking my calories or macros. I'm working out 3-4 times a week. I'm, doing everything right, sleeping 8 hours, all that. I always ask them about alcohol, and it's always underestimated. And we see it in the blood work when it comes back. So at the level of the liver, as you mentioned, it actually blocks a lot of the cholesterol mechanisms that we have in our body. And we've done lots of content around cholesterol. It's necessary for life. We have to have it. But what happens is it blocks cholesterol reuptake, the metabolism that our body does of cholesterol, and our triglyceride metabolism. And we see that in the labs. We'll see elevated triglycerides. We'll see elevated liver enzymes. So again, the liver's main, one of the liver's main jobs is to filter out all the toxins. And if it recognizes alcohol as a toxin,
it will stop doing all of the things.
It will stop doing all of the things. Yeah.
And so while the calorie is an interesting conversation, and it's usually the one everybody lands on, and then the discussion stops there, that's really only the surface of the deal. The real damage done by alcohol in our health journey takes place at the level of the liver. And frankly, long after we have experienced the benefit of the mood or emotional state change, we are still paying for the alcohol.
Yeah.
The liver is just overwhelmed until it's completely caught up and it's processed. The next area is the brain. You know, alcohol, it doesn't just only hit the dopamine and the GABA pathway. It also will hit several other areas. And this is where, you know, we get some of the classic symptoms of alcohol intoxication. The cerebral cortex, which is our front, is where we make executive decision making. This is where, like, why did you do that? I don't know. I was drinking and I wasn't thinking. The reason we use phrases like that is that we lose our ability to actually make great grown-up decisions, to override kind of just instinct and responsiveness. So cerebral cortex is inhibited. Your cerebellum, which is your balance center, this is why we stumble. This is why the police officers on the side of the highway are having people do balance-based testing to see if that's inhibited. And then the hypothalamus, this is our performance center. So like running wind sprints or being a great lover usually don't happen when you've consumed too much alcohol, because our performance center really is blunted. But going back to the dopamine pathway, and we've alluded to this, every human behavior that elicits a dopamine response puts it on the table for potential dependence. Because our brain is pleasure pain. You know, stay alive, avoid pain, then pursue pleasure. On a really basic level, that's where our brain is going. And so the brain is very good at saying, hey, go back to that thing that made me feel good. We notice in people's lives that the things that they struggle with are things that they've kind of always struggled with. There's not a lot of new things, like, and I term them like the drugs of choice. You know, sometimes it's food, sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's pornography, sometimes it's shopping, sometimes it's, you know, whatever the thing is. Like, you go right back into that thing that your brain is like, hey, just go there because we know that'll work.
Yeah.
But that'll work means give me the dopamine hit that I want. And so now there are good addictions that are non-toxic, like working out, endorphins, closing a great deal at work, convincing a woman to say yes and marry you. Like, there are things that dopamine is a gift, but it can be, when overly stimulated, a gateway into addiction. And so this is why alcohol tends to be very, very addictive, because it's wildly effective at the dopamine pathway.
Yeah.
I think it's important also, while we're talking about addiction, to, in our practice, we differentiate between misuse/abuse, where you're using something inappropriately, which many people who consume too much alcohol misuse or abuse it. That is unique and different than addiction. And we're not going to dig deep into those differences, but just to make that distinction. But anything that triggers the dopamine pathway, you know, you're at risk for dependency.
Yeah. What about sleep?
Tell me about sleep.
Negatively affects my sleep. I mean, we've done the podcast on sleep where I talk about being a champion sleeper, love my sleep. But
you have one kryptonite.
That's it. Yeah. Anytime I have like just a drink at dinner or overindulge a little bit, heart rate goes up, my Oura ring triggers a really negative sleep score, like in the 70s, which is uncanny for me.
Yeah, you're always in the 90s.
So, just be wary of that, if we do dig into sleep or talk about sleep.
Alcohol, if you're not a good sleeper and you consume alcohol, alcohol's at play. That's
Which
it.
is really kind of counterintuitive because for me personally, it makes me tired. It makes me
Sure.
sleepy. It's that wind down effect.
Yes.
But then totally negatively affects
This is the seductive.
the relaxation and the deep
Yeah.
sleep that my Aura Ring will pick up.
It
Right?
helps you slide into sleep very effectively, which is why it's seductive.
Yeah.
But the mechanisms and the physiology of falling asleep are different than staying asleep.
Yeah.
It happens to be very, very disruptive in the maintaining of sleep. And this is, so alcohol at night, certainly within 2 hours before bed, there's no way you're not having your sleep impacted by that. And so this is just throwing things out there that might be useful.